Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Delivering his medium-term budget statement, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says government is implementing reforms that will create conditions to attract greater private sector participation and effective infrastructure investment to boost economic activity and enable higher growth over the medium term. He says government is working to mobilise significant private sector financing and technical expertise to augment the limited public sector capacity and capability. CEO of the Road Freight Association, Gavin Kelly, joins us for more as we get some reaction. Gavin, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. What is your reaction to the minister's speech? Do you get the sense that he's taken into account the endless comments, lobbying and interaction from the road freight sector?
Good evening, Mpo, and good evening to all your viewers on this late evening. I think if we look at the statement, and one is a little bit disappointed, there are probably only 3 references to transport, and the transport is around the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project. There's a talk about the Passenger Rail Agency, and then there's a little bit of talk about the landside capacity expansions at the Cape Town container terminal. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Are they going to expand the land, or are they going to actually expand the infrastructure that's there? But in terms of what's happening at the Port of Durban, where we've got many of the biggest problems in terms of moving containers through a port, we don't see any commitment there. There's a bit of a wishy-washy talk about, oh, we know that there's a couple of issues, and in the 25-26 year, we're going to take a look at that. We really thought there would have been a statement, for example, giving money to Transnet port terminals and Transnet to deal with the very equipment they are struggling with at the Port of Durban.
The minister also spoke about how the state is making a concerted effort to increase the pool of funders to diversify public infrastructure financing. He spoke about reforms being implemented to create these conditions to attract greater private sector participation. How effective will this be? Because it's on paper as we speak.
Yes, exactly, Mpo. And I think this is one of the greatest frustrations that the association has been voicing over the last couple of months. We've been speaking about revitalizing rail. We've been speaking about having private players coming in to assist with getting rail moving, or in the ports. And we've just seen, after at least 5 to 6 years of having private companies coming, making presentations, a tender having gone out, the whole process now being stopped, albeit be it through a legal process. So there doesn't really seem to be concrete or very tight and clear direction in terms of how we're going to get private sector involved. And of course, private sector is a little bit skittish because, again, there aren't these clear guidelines as to how they can participate.
What has the ripple effect been as you talk about the promises, but yet to see the implementation, more so as we consider the number of state-owned enterprises that may be failing, bleeding capital, or perhaps just not doing what they're meant to be doing?
Well, there are a number of ripple effects that come into play. And the first is that capital that perhaps some entities in South Africa and some overseas entities might have put into the South African economy, into South African infrastructure, have gone elsewhere. They've gone to the ports of Maputo, ports of Lobito, to Luanda. So that's the first thing, is that we actually see investment going somewhere else, where there's a clear direction in terms of improving efficiencies and infrastructure equipment itself. And secondly, we can see what's happening in terms of the delays in the ports. We see what's happening with shipping lines as they feel they would rather go to other ports where the delays aren't so long. And the cost of logistics in South Africa just continues to tick up as costs downstream are added, penalties and delays. We've just had discussions, just seen reports from Transnet talking about demurrage and delay penalties coming in. And it's penalties that are applied to those parts of the transport or the road freight logistics leg, or the logistics leg in total, that actually aren't creating the problem. So that's what we see. And then at the end of the day, you and I pay more, and it has this huge pressure in terms of where goods are going to go through South Africa or not.
What advantage will the amendments of the Triple P regulations have on the sector? I mean, my understanding that it's to simplify requirements for undertaking a number of projects which are on the cards.
Well, we must remember, Mpo, that the first thing is that the Triple P, the last part of the Triple P acronym is partnership. Mm-hmm. So it has to be very clear what the partners will get out of that. One of the partners is the state, who owns these assets, owns these huge nodes that exist all over the place that need to be used. The second is that the rules that are going to be in place in terms of the engagement. So if the private sector brings in funding, what along the line is going to happen to that funding? How's it going to be spent? What guarantees are in place that it doesn't disappear down, a huge hole, and the actual things the private sector, the economy needed, are not then put in place to increase or improve efficiency. So that's really, when you start tweaking with rules in terms of Triple Ps, there needs to be good, clear direction in terms of how the private sector investment will A, be protected, and B, what beneficiation, what improvement, what efficiencies are going to come out of this partnership.
Mm-hmm. Just before I spoke to you, I was on the line with the Public Servants Association, and they spoke quite a great deal about a growing concern which may perhaps at this stage be overlooked or not mentioned in the budget, speaking about how this could have a massive dent on the economy, the growing concern of water shortages and the water crisis that's looming, and how staff are complaining about the impact of this on a day-to-day. I mean, what's your take? Because load shedding was the big factor, and now it seems that water shedding is the next big thing.
Well, Mpo, they're all sort of linked together, don't they?
Yeah.
So there are three things that come into play here generally. I think we as South Africans all have become very aware of. The first is that we need to maintain the infrastructure that we have. And there are cases where sadly this hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is, well, if it's working, don't fix it if it ain't broke, I suppose. That's the type of attitude people have. But you need to have maintenance. Secondly, there are many towns in our country that are growing. Around the world it's happening. It's happening in South Africa. And so your drag or your draw or your consumption is growing, not because people are using more water, but there are more people who need water. So you need to expand those facilities. That's exactly what happens in the ports. The ports were built 20, 30 years ago. They might have been upgraded once or twice, but the demand on space and to get cargo through has grown. So that's happening with water. And then finally, we need to have role players in there that can help. Government can't do it all by itself. No matter how much we'd like to point fingers at government and blame them for many of the ills, the reality is this. Government isn't the actual service provider. It needs to partner with those private institutions or quasi-government institutions that can actually provide the services and help government to do the projected planning, the infrastructure development, and the control in terms of making sure that keeps working and growing with populations.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for speaking to us this evening. Of course, getting some reaction to the Minister's budget speech, CEO of the Road Freight Association, Gavin Kelly.